event organized by the Open Dialogue Foundation together with the Italian Federation for Human Rights that I am representing here, and with the Freedom Kazakhstan Foundation. We will have today several experts speaking about a very important issue. I would say a key issue in international relations now. And we will do this also with a prominent member of the European Parliament, who is also the chair of the European Parliament delegation for the relation with the People's Republic of China. So the issue of sanctions and counter-sanctions now is, in my opinion, one of the most important. Why? Because the authoritarian regimes in the last few years have been more and more active, sometimes in a very violent way, in all possible violation of basic human rights and even of international law, of the basis of international relations. What happened in Belarus last month with the forced landing of an European aircraft from Ryanair and basically the kidnapping of a Belarusian dissident is something that is such a blatant violation of international law that is something like international piracy. So it is absolutely not acceptable from the European Union. So the EU is doing sanctions. Exactly today, the Council of Foreign Ministers of the European Union adopted sanctions against other 86 officials of the Belarusian state. And something similar is happening also with other authoritarian regimes, such as the People's Republic of China or the Russian Federation. So the question is how now the European Union and the democratic states in general should react when the authoritarian regimes do measures against the sanctions. There is a big difference, in my opinion, is that while the democratic states and the EU adopt sanctions against people that violate, that are perpetrators of serious human rights violations, the authoritarian regimes adopt just countermeasures without targeting people responsible of any violations. So this again is something absolutely not acceptable. In our opinion, at least in my personal opinion for sure, the sanction of the European Union should be more proactive and should target not only individuals who are perpetrators of serious human rights abuses, but also people that are involved in grand corruption. So a mechanism more similar to the Magnitsky sanctions, the Magnitsky Global Act that has been adopted by the United States. So we are working with many parliaments, with the European Parliament. We try to have a constructive dialogue between us, that are civil society organizations and experts, and governments, Parliament, in this case, in particular the European Parliament, that has a very important role. I would like just to conclude now my short introduction because there are several key experts on the issues that we are going to debate today, and I will leave the floor to Lyudmila Kozlowska of the Open Dialogue Foundation, who will be our moderator.
Thank you, Antonio. Thank you, distinguished guests, and I'm happy to discuss such important topic today with you. And since we have with us both representatives of civil society, but also members of the European Parliament who actually became a target for these contra-sanctions, I think it would be also important if our viewers will direct your questions in comments so we can address afterwards in our discussion. But please allow me to start our discussion with Dolkun Isa, President of the World Uyghur Congress and Vice President of the Unrepresented Nations and People Organizations, and ask you that everyone is knowing that China is like one of the first countries to react quite sharply to the EU's application of the global sanctions regime to those involved in human rights abuses. How concerned should be Western countries about these countermeasures China has adopted in response to personal sanctions on Chinese nationals? Your experience as a human rights defender, as a promoter of such important topic, please, floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you. First, I would like to thank Open Dialogue Foundation and the Italian Federation for Human Rights and the Freedom Kazakhstan Foundation for inviting me and as Eric and giving me this opportunity to speak here. Well, the relationship between European Union and China has changed significantly over the past months. In the March, EU took the long overdue but extremely welcome decision to sanction Chinese official individuals and the official and the one entity responsible for the Uyghur genocide. When China responded by imposing country measures on the 10 European individuals, including democratic elected parliament members, officials, and the research institution, by attacking the European Union democratic principles and trying to silence its freedom of speech, China showed the EU that is not a reliable partner. And for a while now, Europe has found itself meaningful position, definite its relationship with China. It should make sure it does not conduct business as usual with the government that is actively committing genocide and export its repressive regime abroad, threatening EU citizens and the EU rule of democracy. So we have seen, we have now Chinese government testing facial recognition, voice recognition, and this all surveillance technology testing for the Uyghurs in Turkestan, then later used in the other provinces in China, Hong Kong. Now is export some other European country as well. So China now is the impose, it is dictatorial regime to impose as a neighboring country, some other world. And now it is business should not be as usual. I would like to emphasize, and this time European Union and the sanctioned Chinese official then immediately countermeasure to and more double, maybe three double measure to against the European Union. Because why? 1989 is that if you really look at Tiananmen students demonstration and has been cracked down, and thousands of Chinese students was cracked down at the time. But that time also European Union and some other world democratic nations sanctioned Chinese government, but Chinese government didn't do such a countermeasure or sanction against the European Union. Because why? 30 years ago, China was not the economic power. That time, China need European technology, Western technology, European money, Western money. Now China is being second big economy. Now China is trying to ignore all international pressure. China saying, I'm strong good enough. I don't need to. You need to me. Because this point, all the European countries, all democratic United States, all democratic countries have a responsibility. Because China coming to this level because of some money, because of the technology from European technology, from Western technology, Western money. So that's why now it is only political level. Just the sanction is a political level is not good enough to stop the genocide, and it is the correct time stop the business with China as well. One side, United States, Canada, UK, and the European Union, one side sanction Chinese government. Other side, European. This is the Western is a brands, and all company continue make business. If you look at from the 2018 to 2020, and this Western company make more money than other years. So we have said very clearly. Now Chinese developed China is spreads this coronavirus at least China is sold mask and all is a medical technique, everything. So it is that the old company should be and takes the responsibility. Even this country and the European country particularly, and supply chain law and stops the businesses with China. This is another way, just a political sanction, and or just to make empty statement. Very nothing. Since 2018 until 2020, European Parliament passed 4 resolutions on the ongoing genocide. But China is never stopped. Since the 2 years, more camps in Turkestan, more forced labor, more separation, family separation, more sterilization movement for sterilization we haven't seen. So that's why it is that we know China not only threatens for the Uyghur, Tibet, and Hong Kong. We have seen what is happening in Hong Kong. Hong Kong's democracy over. China never kept its promise, international convention. So already break and now it's all in the democracy, rule of law over in the Hong Kong. In the situation, and China is, we have seen, if European Union and the United States, Canada, only European Union is alone not going to success. Only United States only cannot success for this. Just at the moment, transatlantic cooperation very necessarily. So all countries, particularly democratic nation, must be cooperate. Particularly transatlantic cooperation is necessarily. Then they will sanction politically, and besides economically sanction to the Chinese government. Then it will be more useful. This is my personal view, because today is China and EU must not take strong and clear position towards China, because this must be a holistic approach adopted in the whole policy area. With regards to EU must recognize China is equal depend EU and vice versa, especially with regards advanced technology. And as such, EU really does have leverage when negotiating deal like EU-China comprehensive agreement on investment. It must listen to position of the European Parliament with rules and the ratification process, ensure deal contains strong and enforceable human rights clauses. Furthermore, it must conditional on China and ratifying and the ILO Convention on the Forced Labor. Importantly, and the European Union must make it is clear position ongoing genocide and the Uyghurs and the Hong Kong's issue. So this is my answer for your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorkan. Very strong message, basically, that EU shouldn't and Western countries shouldn't be concerned with this response. They should keep pressure and support civil society and victims of political persecution. And now I would like to give a possibility to speak to Dr. Aaron Rhodes, Senior Fellow at the Common Sense Society and President of the Forum for Religious Freedom of Europe. Dr. Aaron, please, can you represent for us information how oppressive regime use human rights language and intergovernmental institutions to mobilize resistance to targeted sanctions as a contrary to multilateralism, economic and social rights, and peace? Please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to join this meeting. Like you said, we are speaking about authoritarian countermeasures to targeted sanctions, and among those, it seems to me, we must include United Nations institutions and officials. I would like to use this opportunity to briefly note the use of multilateralism as an ideal and multilateral processes within the UN framework to wage an ideological battle against sanctions imposed for violation of human rights. Over the past few years, we have seen an orchestrated campaign by dictatorial states aimed at transforming perpetrators of massive human rights abuses into victims of what are called unilateral coercive measures in UN parlance. The liberal institutionalism of international human rights is being subverted. These regimes now see this model as one in which they can defend their policies using human rights institutions and human rights language. First of all, regarding the UN Charter, last October, China, Russia, and 24 other countries called on the United States and Western nations to end the use of unilateral sanctions, which they said make it harder to deal with COVID-19. Sanctions are also regularly called racist. They are seen as a legacy of imperialism and associated with aggression and war. This past March, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and others formed a coalition to defend the United Nations Charter by pushing back against the use or threat of force in unilateral sanctions. Other founding members of this group are Algeria, Angola, Belarus, Bolivia, Cambodia, Cuba, Eritrea, Laos, and it goes on like that. A concept note for the so-called Group of Friends in Defense of the Charter of the United Nations claims that sanctions are an attack on multilateralism, which threaten global peace and security. The concept note said the world is seeing a growing resort to unilateralism marked by isolationist and arbitrary actions. If you read the UN Charter, you don't find anything about unilateral sanctions at all. And so this is really a lot of bluff that rests upon a completely subjective interpretation of this document. But this tendency also involves UN human rights institutions and processes. UN officials have often denounced sanctions. The Secretary General in 2000 described that the existence of a sanctions regime almost inevitably transforms an entire society for the worse. In 2013, the UN Secretary General published a short report on human rights and unilateral coercive measures, which was based on a survey of member states. The countries that responded to the survey included Belarus, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, the Sudan, and the Syrian Arab Republic. And now, based on this sample of the world community, the report concluded, respondents asserted that the United Nations must take a strong position against unilateral coercive measures and demand their abolition. Some support was expressed for the establishment of a penalty system against those adopting unilateral coercive measures, and the creation of a mechanism for monitoring such measures, possibly through a special procedures mandate. Now, this resolution, or this report, then led to a UN Human Rights Council resolution. They created a mandate on the negative impact of unilateral coercive measures on the enjoyment of human rights, with Resolution 2721, which was introduced by Iran on behalf of the non-aligned movement. And this Human Rights Council has this has provided a platform to make their case. They vested this anti-sanctions movement with the institutional legitimacy of the United Nations. Now, the resolution itself that they made, and this is a very interesting thing to read because it's a catalog of all the complaints about sanctions, and it's a window into this ideology by which human rights violating regimes are defending themselves against sanctions. They're stressing that they're against international law, international humanitarian law, the charter, and the norms and principles governing the peaceful relations among states. They say that the sanctions disproportionately affect the poor and the most vulnerable classes. And they are asking the international community to ensure that multilateralism, mutual respect, and peaceful settlement of disputes are used instead of sanctions. They say that this is backed up by a statement made at the World Conference on Human Rights in 1993, which is true. But the World Conference on Human Rights is also responsible for a lot of the problems we have in human rights today. In addition, so they say that the sanctions are contrary to the norms of international law and the Charter. Unilateral coercive measures continue to be promulgated, implemented, and enforced by inter alia, resorting to war and militarism with all their negative implications for social humanitarian activities and economic and social development. I could go on about this resolution, but let's continue. The mandate, this resolution established a mandate. Now, the Human Rights Council has about 44 special procedures, special mandates, and about 2/3 of them have absolutely zero to do with human rights, by the way. They're largely politicized efforts to criticize free countries and promote ideology in the name of human rights. And now let's look at this special rapporteur. The job of the special rapporteur on unilateral coercive measures is to gather relevant information and to study trends. The resolution was adopted by a vote of 31-14 in the Human Rights Council, with 2 abstentions. In favor, Algeria, Argentina, Benin, Botswana, Brazil, Burkina Faso, Chile, China, Congo, Cote d'Ivoire, Cuba, so-and-so going, I don't need to name them all. I think you can imagine. And against.
But we see all democratic country. I mean, like all democracies said about.
I don't see any non-democratic countries in the countries voting against. Costa Rica and Kazakhstan abstained, by the way.
Yeah, as usual.
Now, the special rapporteur of this is Alina Duhan. She's a Belarusian international law specialist. And she has claimed in various correspondence that the UN Charter does not provide any possibility for the application of unilateral sanctions. In her report to the Human Rights Council in 2020, she claimed that the illegal nature of unilateral coercive measures has been repeatedly affirmed in numerous resolutions of the Human Rights Council. Well, as far as it goes, this is true. Let me conclude by saying that the implications of this are, I think, rather broad. Coercive authoritarian states have coalesced in the past 10 years or so into a kind of alliance, especially in the United Nations, but also in other multilateral organizations like OSCE. And they increasingly use the human rights system to defend themselves and to ridicule and delegitimize democratic countries. With Magnitsky and similar sanctions, democratic states can break free from the rules that have come to protect human rights violators from penalties. Sanctions, in my view, are as much moral statements as they are meant to achieve specific ends. In my experience working with human rights defenders in oppressive states, most support sanctions against their own governments, even if they themselves feel their negative impacts. Indeed, such human rights defenders are blamed for sanctions because they have informed the international community about violations. It is not possible to make an objective determination, but it appears that forward-looking people in such countries know their governments have brought such sanctions down upon themselves and see that those sanctions reflect rejection of the abuses from which they suffer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Rhodes. It's really extremely important how actually authoritarian states abuse human rights language. They violate rights, but they have no absolutely ground, any let's say, I lose this word, but there is nothing disturb them to violate human rights, and at the same time use this international organization, this international language, human rights language, to protect themselves from being accountable. So this is really important. I think this message has to be delivered also to members of European Parliament, European Commission, and others who work on personal sanctions, especially, and in international institutions. So thank you so much. And now I would like to give the floor to Reinhard Bütikofer, a member of the European Parliament and the chair of the European Parliament's delegation for relations with People's Republic of China. And Mr. Bütikofer, you in particular, the European Parliament, has strongly, absolutely condemned counter-sanctions by China and Russia. And you are the one of members of European Parliament who was affected with these Chinese counter-sanctions. In our human rights field, we see you as as a hero, as this person who has this badge of honor and proof of your effectiveness. But what does this mean for you? How do you feel, and what do you think about it? Please, floor is yours.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for honoring the work of the European Parliament. But when you are in search of heroes, you should look at all the members of the European Parliament that have united to uphold our common position.
Of course.
And when you look at the resolutions that we have passed over the last half year, one resolution on Hong Kong, one on Xinjiang, one on the sanctions, you will find that in all three cases, we had at least 590 votes in favor and never more than 40 votes opposed. So the strength of the stance that the European Parliament has been taking does not reside with just a few individuals. It is based on the alliance building between democratic groups, from the conservatives, the Christian Democrats, Social Democrats, liberals, plus Greens, and sometimes even others. I would like to make three arguments. One is, what have we learned, or what can we learn when we look at the recent tussle with China over our sanctions that we imposed on them, and their reaction on the same day? I would say there may be 6 points that we should look at. The European Union meant to impose very soft sanctions. The 4 individuals that were sanctioned by us, one of which is already retired, were not the most important perpetrators of atrocities. The party chair of the Communist Party in Xinjiang was notably excluded from the sanctions, even though he's the architect of the oppressive system. So clearly, the EU meant to signal, we will impose sanctions, but we will do that in a limited way. And they hope that China would, in whatever reaction they would cook up, would also limit their response. That turned out to be a miscalculation, and that demonstrates that China is adopting a strategy that some people have described as mirror and escalate. If China gets hit by sanctions, they hit back, but they insist on escalating. So while we sanctioned 4 individuals and 1 entity, XPCC, they sanctioned 10 individuals, including individuals from all the major democratic groups in the European Parliament, and 4 entities, including the whole Human Rights Council, including a whole very important China think tank in Germany. And the signal from the Chinese side was very clear. Nobody's going to get away with criticizing China. And there's no moderation intended. China is trying to set the rules for discourse about China globally. China means to define where the red lines are, what is to be said, what is allowed to be said about China, regardless of where the speech is happening, and what is not allowed to be said. So I think that the tool of soft sanctions went out of business with this experience because China signaled we're not taking any. And that means that whenever you opt for sanctions, you should calculate very carefully whether you're willing to endure the battle that will result, whether you're willing to pick that fight in earnestly, or whether you're just behaving as if you meant it. I think in this case, the European Union was saved by the European Parliament because the European Parliament reacted in strong terms. We drew the conclusion that we put the CAI into the freezer, where it will stay indefinitely as long as China is not revoking its sanctions, which is not to say that the sanctions are the only criticism that we would voice with regard to CAI. It just says that we're proud enough not to allow deliberation on this piece of decision-making as long as the parliament itself is under sanctions from China. If the sanctions would be revoked, then we would still have a substantive debate about the merit of the deal, and a lot of colleagues would certainly come to the conclusion that this deal is not worth having. But that's not the point where we're at the moment. But had the European Union not saved had the European Parliament not saved the European Union, our reaction would have been weak. And you saw that when you look at some of the major capitals. Berlin never even expressed regret over the Chinese sanctions. There was not a single sentence from the chancellor criticizing China's sanctions against several of her compatriots. And other governments were a bit more forthcoming. The French government, the British government were supporting colleagues more openly, but the EU is at a stage, obviously, where we need to realize that these sanctions are not just moral statements. They may be conceived as just moral statements, but they amount to acts in a political battle. And that is what we have to look at. Are we ready to fight such battles? And that means that sanctions must attach a price tag to the sanctioned behavior and not just a commentary. A sanction that is just a comment is not up to par with the reality and the intensity of the political confrontation between democracy and authoritarianism. It must attach a price tag. Another thing that we learned is that it is much better to coordinate if you sanction. It was a good experience to see the Americans, the Canadians, the Brits, and even Iceland joining action. And we have seen other behavior in the past. We have seen a funny kind of sanctions competition when some governments, instead of building alliances, emphasize that we sanction better than you do. That is not helpful in building a situation where democracies have each other's back. So I believe it's more adequate to coordinate sanctions, and if that amounts to just sanctioning 10 people instead of 75, the togetherness, the coherence of action is more important than the numbers. That's also a lesson. And then another lesson is that you have to be willing to pay a certain price. Sanctions that do have an impact never have an impact just on the other side. They always also have an impact on your own side. We just saw that with the sanctions against Belarus today, where a number of countries were originally not willing to pay that price. But there has to be clarity, moral clarity and political clarity. And the last point is, in order to make sanctions effective, I believe you also have to pick and choose where you sanction. Just sanctioning as a habit, indiscriminately sanctioning as if you go and have lunch. I mean, that makes absolutely no political sense. We have to develop a sanctioning strategy that clearly is following a set of priorities. And in the past, we have been more willing to sanction weak partners and reluctant and reticent when we were asked to sanction strong partners. And for a while now, I think we should muster all the strength that we can find to sanction tough partners.
Exactly.
And maybe relent a little bit with the weak partners. And I believe if you dare sanctioning the tough cookies, then the weaker nations will learn a lesson from that. So instead of creating a system where you're always prepared to sanction Cambodia or other weak nations, but it takes you forever to get around to sanctioning China. I think that's the wrong approach. We should focus on the powerful perpetrators of human rights violations, and by doing that, teach everybody else a lesson. The second point I want to make is that we have to look at whether we're playing offense or defense at the moment. And I believe we're in a mood of playing defense. And a lot of people have drunk this Kool-Aid that has brought them to believe that China is going from strength to strength, and China is just insurmountably powerful, and China is constituting a threat, or to say it more politely, a challenge. And I believe that too many have fallen victim to this Beijing propaganda, that the rest of the world has only one choice. Either you accommodate them today, or you will have to accommodate them 2 years from now, but at less favorable conditions. When some leaders, some European leaders decided to go for CAI, that was the kind of logic that they pursued. The chancellor has been quoted as saying, look, we have to take the deal because 5 years from now we will not get this deal anymore. This is exactly the mindset that I think is extremely worrying and destructive, where we underestimate our own capabilities of putting up a valuable fight and overestimate China's ability to get their way. But of course, this has to be reflected also with regard to how we look at the playing field. Too many around Europe are just looking at a triangle between China and the US and Europe, as if the whole world just consisted of this one triangle. And too few look at all the other international players, weaker players, that also want to have agency and that also want to sit at the table. And I believe that if we define our own position as defending our own interests alone, we're the haves, and we're going to be portrayed as the haves that want to defend their vested interests against the have-nots. And China will portray itself as the champion of the have-nots, the one country that has risen to such a strength that it can challenge the haves. And I think we should, instead of just playing defense vis-a-vis China, we should play offense with defining the vision of the world that we are going to pursue and the vision of the world that we're going to offer others, and not just looking at ourselves and where China might be hurting us. So when President Biden pushed hard at the G7 for what he has been calling the Build Back Better world, this new international infrastructure investment instrument that could offer a counter offer to the Belt and Road, I think that was the right approach. You can't fight something with nothing. And I recall a conversation with the finance minister of Indonesia, who was asked once about what she felt about the Belt and Road, and her answer was, give me an alternative and I'll tell you what I think about it. And that's the attitude that a lot of countries have. So this is also the context. And finally, my third point is we cannot separate the whole sanctions game from the economic relationship that we have with China. Several European companies, big multinational companies, have put so many eggs into the Chinese basket that they're now basically a soft spot. There are proud industry that turn out to be the soft spot politically. And I don't think this situation can be turned around easily. It will take some effort. You can't just turn on the heel. But certainly, if you want to be in this sanctions game effectively and make your point, then you have to shape also your economic policy accordingly.
Exactly.
I think we need more instruments. We need, for instance, an anti-coercion instrument. We don't have an instrument that would allow us to fight back against the kind of behavior that China is displaying vis-a-vis Australia, against the kind of behavior that they displayed vis-a-vis H&M and Adidas and Nike, and against the infringement through the party sales in European companies, or the infringement through the corporate social credit system. We need new instruments, and we need to reshape the approach to a resilient international value chain strategy. I don't think that China is so overwhelmingly strong. They see that they have been antagonizing not just us around Europe, but many countries, including in different parts of the world. They are dominated by a certain level of anxiety over whether they will be able to live up to the promises they have made to their people. So I think the sanctions policy cannot be radicalized independent of these wider considerations. It has to be integrated with these wider considerations to be effective.
Thank you so much for your really extensive replies. I think that for all of our guests, it's really important to know this insight from the side of European Parliament, what many members of European Parliament think, how you build your strategy towards to actually such difficult geopolitical players as China. And now I would like to give the floor to our guests who can speak about Turkey, which is also extremely difficult geopolitical partner of the European Union, and not only for Western countries. Dr. Ugur Tok, Director of Platform for Peace and Justice. So, Ugur, we heard in March that Germany foreign minister warned Turkey that this year, actually, European Union sanctions can be applied for Turkey because of this huge violation of human rights, especially because they decided to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention. Can you please say to us, to our audience, actually also referring to what we just heard from Mr. Butikofer, what challenges we have with Turkey, what should be done, bearing in mind all of these problems and sanctions, etc. Please, floor is yours.
Dear Ludmila, thank you very much for organizing this and giving me the floor. As you rightly suggested, Turkey has not any countermeasures against any target sanctions, because there is no targeted sanctions against Turkey. It's not because Turkey is a high standard democracy without any crimes, but EU unfortunately has not dared to impose any targeted sanctions against Turkey. This is very in line with the previous speaker, Mr. Butikofer, like punishing smaller countries like Cambodia and whatever, but not touching the main perpetrators, main players, autocratic countries like China. This is meaningless, of course. As we all know today, EU officials come together for the sanction against Belarus, but there's nothing about Russia. Which is the main actually perpetrator, and we all know that the actions about Ryanair actions, the real perpetrator is Russia, and Belarus cannot do anything without support of Russia. So basically, we need to address directly to the main perpetrators like Russia, Turkey, China, etc. I want to follow up with basically EU wants democracy, rule of law, and other contemporary norms in the neighboring countries, but does not want to do the necessity and take risks. Like if you take Turkey example, like tempering the refugee deal. With other words, you want to eat pizza, but you don't want to take the risk of putting your hand into fire or putting a fire. If you want to eat pizza, then you need to fire and take the risk. That's the basic rule, I guess. Now, let me draw a general picture of human rights records of Turkey. Turkey is ranked 107th in the World Justice Project's Rule of Law Index 2020. This puts Turkey between Mali and Nigeria. This is far worse than 10 years before. This decline of democracy and rule of law is also very much clearly illustrated by European Parliament reporters, and almost all of the EP reporters published in the recent years contained serious warnings regarding the rights violations and collapse of the democratic institutions in the country. The government of Turkey does not hesitate to use all institutions of the country to realize its autocratic project. One of the many examples is the way Diyanet operates. Diyanet is a state institution in Turkey that governs religious affairs in and outside the country. So that means there are thousands of Diyanet workers across Europe whose salary is paid by Turkish government. Now, Diyanet operates as an agent of the government rather than an autonomous body that was originally established for the need of Turkish Muslims across the world. Not only in Turkey, but also in Europe, Diyanet involves in shade operations in tandem with Turkish embassies. Countries like Netherlands launches legal prosecutions against Diyanet representatives for gathering private information of Turkish dissidents living in Europe. Similar activities reported by other EU countries like Germany and Austria as well. So at the moment, Turkey is being accused by UN bodies of committing crimes against humanity. This accusation is very serious, and you can find it at least 4 rulings of the UN working groups. Unfortunately, the international community is not eager to hold autocrats like Erdogan accountable for their crimes. We must keep in mind that bullies cannot be appeased. They must be confronted and stopped for the sake of those who are opposed by them. Oftentimes, those who oppose autocrats don't receive adequate support from the international community. Look at the famous cases of Kavala and Demirtas in Turkey. Despite the rulings of the European Court of Human Rights, both of them are still in jail. Resolutions of PACE and European Parliament did not result in their release. So what will happen now? We don't know. No one knows the answer to this. And recently, yet another prominent rights defender of the country, Ömer Faruk Gergerlioğlu, has been put in jail simply on the pretext of a Twitter post. Note that he is also one of the stronger voices of Uyghur people in Turkey. So his arrest came shortly after he raised awareness about the China's concentration camps and shady relations of the government with the Chinese government. I'm sure Mr. Dolkunisa would support me in that. What is going to happen to nearly 150,000 public servants who were sacked by the government without a legal investigation? No one knows that either. They lost their jobs, passports, as well as dignities, and with a presidential decree. You know what is a presidential decree? It's an A4 paper, and whatever the president writes on it. So it's your fate, actually. Unfortunately, European Court of Human Rights has not been as courageous in the cases of decree laws as in the cases of Osman Kavala and Demirtas. As a result of courts, controversial relationship with the Turkish government. As a consequence of increased and constant violation of international law, last year, some EU countries demanded sanctions against Turkey. Greece asked for sectional sanctions targeting key aspects of the Turkish economy, such as banking and energy sector. However, as usual, unfortunately, Germany opposed sanctions and wanted to keep communication channels with Ankara. MEP Udo Bullmann, who is also EU affairs spokesperson for German Social Democrat Party, justified that by saying, we should not deal with Turkey as an autocratic monolith, to keep the flexibility to transform and bring Turkey back to the family for the peaceful nations. He also added that this is what Merkel's intention. Well, however, we saw that appeasing policy against autocratic leaders, in specific Erdogan, did not work as EU leaders expected. Erdogan didn't slow down his autocratic policies, but made him even more treacherous. One proof is Turkey kidnapped innocent civilians, maybe most of you are aware of this, from European countries like Albania, Kosovo, Ukraine, and attempting to do the same in Western European countries like the Netherlands and Switzerland, in the very front of international community. 4 UN special reporters penned down a letter to UN High Commissioner for the Human Rights and reported Turkey abducted 104 dissidents from 19 different countries, violating international law. This is basically outrageous. One recent abduction case, we are working closely with Open Dialogue on this, is in Kyrgyzstan, still going on. The victim's name is Orhan İnandı, and he is still in Kyrgyzstan, and we are trying to create awareness to stop his abduction to Turkey. On the other side, compared to EU, US have clearer and tougher foreign policy against Turkey, and it seems it works. So this is a good example. President Biden refused to talk to Erdogan until the last NATO meeting last week in Brussels. This caused a real worry on Turkish side, and we watched this on the media. And the other good example, as most of you be following, US and Turkey had a disagreement over Russian S-4Ts, famous missiles. US first dismissed Turkey from F-35 program and proposing further sanctions. In response, what did Turkey do? They simply stepped back. They're now looking for solutions on what to do with S-400s. An option is sending them to out of Turkish soils, for example, to Qatar, new ally of Turkey. What gave momentum to Erdogan's populist autocracy is the fact that he was once victimized by the ultra-seculars in the past in the country. Erdogan played into victim role and won. As such, any step dismissing Turkey from its EU trajectory to punish general or sectional sanctions that would punish the country as a whole will play into Erdogan's hand. He actually wants such kind of punishment by EU to play victim and get more public support internally. He already says EU is a Christian club and will never admit Turkey because Turkey is Muslim. As proof, he says Turkey has been waiting at the door of EU for more than 45 years and never been accepted. So there's truth inside, by the way, and there is a share to blame European countries. So this will give him the control of the country if such a major function happens. So instead, I propose targeted sanctions with justifications will work better. Thanks for your patience, and thanks to again the organizers.
Thank you, Ugur. I think it's really important, all message, all massive information, because this is what actually Mr. Butikofer said. It's also a game about difficult countries, strategic country, and Turkey one of this kind of country. And we have other country which is like a leader of Central Asia region, and which actually loves abuse international international instruments like Interpol, mutual legal assistance, extradition requests, etc., to persecute a decent person who actually promote personal sanctions, to silence those who fight from abroad and highlight human rights violation. We have one victim with us, and we now want to little bit to show not only members of European Parliament experience, but also civil society experience, lawyers experience, those who collect information and what they face after that. So what are you example of this kind of person who unfortunately was persecuted? Can you please give us the more background? What does it mean, personal sanctions for and contra sanctions, why they are done by Russia, Belarus, and what does it mean the position of Kazakhstan in this regard? Please, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak. I'm sorry, I have a weird setup. I hope that my connection doesn't go down again. And first of all, I would like to say, Luda, I refuse to be represented as a victim. I'm
okay.
a fighter, first of all. I'm not
fighter.
A victim.
Sorry, fighter.
They want to make a victim out of me. I'm not going down as a victim. So anyway, I'll speak from my part of the world, so former Soviet Union countries, and of course my country, my home country, Kazakhstan. And I'll start with the events that took place just recently in the beginning of this month. And as we already discussed, Western countries, they, including the EU, they impose sanctions, both personal and sectoral, on Belarus and Russia. And Russia and Belarus, as well as Kazakhstan, they are parts of the Eurasian Economic Union, and there are three other smaller countries from this former Soviet Union with the smaller economies. And that union is referred by us, like in our part of the world, as the union of three dictators, Putin, Lukashenko, and Nazarbayev. And so in the beginning of this month, representative of Russia announced that the Eurasian Union started working on contra-sanctions to the Western sanctions against Russia and Kazakhstan. And immediately Kazakhstan reacted, and the foreign ministry made a statement saying that Kazakhstan is not involved in any talks on countermeasures, on any consolidated political or economic measures, and against sanctions imposed on Belarus and Russia. So why did Kazakhstan feel compelled to make such statement right away? And in making such statement, it really went against its long-standing historic partners. Certainly, it was not made out of support for Western sanctions for human rights violations in Belarus and Russia, and statement was made purely out of fear of becoming themselves a target of sanctions. Kazakhstan prefers violate human rights. It does violate human rights, but it's trying to keep low profile. And I'm not surprised that Kazakhstan is an example, like when it in casting a vote in the on the UN, right? That Dr. Rhodes described. Kazakhstan prefers not to pick sides, right? Because they try to keep low profile. And it's obvious that this statement that Kazakhstan made that contradicted Russian position. It demonstrates that when it comes to personal sanctions, every authoritarian regime is on its own. And the regime in Kazakhstan right now actively demonstrating that he has nothing to do with those two, Putin and Lukashenko. And it's actually, it demonstrates this example that it will be hard for authoritarian regimes to coordinate their countermeasures against the West, because everyone who runs those countries have a certain conflict of interest, and they all depend on the West more than the West depends on them. I want to say that in the past, Russia, which has a great experience with different type of sanctions, New Zealand sanctions, tried to have some countermeasures. And if we go back to 2012, the response to the adoption of the Magnitsky list by the US, not the law back then, just the list, Russia adopted a law for sanctions against US citizens, and they said for violation of human rights and freedoms of Russian citizens. And that law, under that law, there was a list created that banned US citizens from entering Russia. In Russia were frozen. I believe that late Senator McCain was one of the people sanctions under that law. The law also suspended the activity of politically active non-profitable organizations that received funds from the US, and banned citizens of the United States from adopting children from Russia. And was that response effective? No, not really. What Putin really did is that he only hurt his political party. He undermined public support. This law undermined public support for Putin, and in the end, it kind of hurt Russian society. But in dealing with any sanctions, with its countermeasures that Russia uses against different sanctions, it's almost comical how it always hurts Russia itself rather than the West. And in Russia, it's already became a meme that, in response to Western sanctions, Putin will bomb Voronezh. And Voronezh is a small town in Russia. Yeah. It's a bit funny, but ironic, or I don't know, it's like we have perverted sense of humor, but what we see, we see how these regimes, whatever they do, they only in the end hurt their own people again and again. And I don't believe that these countermeasures that we wanted to discuss today to targeted sanctions, countermeasures that can be adopted by Russia, Belarus, or Kazakhstan when its day comes, they would have any significant effect on the West, because those countries, as I said, depend on the West more than the West depends on them. But what we really should worry about, I believe, it's a reprisal against those who specifically work on personal sanctions and who are not protected by their states or institutions. And there is a very vulnerable group that can easily fall victim to authoritarian countermeasures. These are activists, lawyers, human rights defenders, whistleblowers, researchers, sources, you name. So all those who provide information and evidence, and it can be publicly or secretly, to the West about human rights violation and about corruption schemes in those non-democratic states. So those who work on the personal sanctions, they always know that they are put themselves and their families, unfortunately, in great personal, legal, financial, reputational risk. And because those who are in power, they always, these corrupt officials or oligarchs, they go to great lengths to shield themselves from any accountability, and so they can go after those who trying to bring that accountability upon them. In my case, as Luda mentioned, is a good example of what happens, how authoritarian regime can prosecute those who consistently work on any personal sanctions scheme. And as a lawyer, I've been collecting testimonies of victims of torture and political repression in Kazakhstan for many years. And we actually started kind of dealing with the notion of personal sanctions back in 2011, 2012, when after the shooting, the tragedy that took place in Zhanaozen, in Kazakhstan, when the oil workers and peaceful protesters were shot by the regime, and after a lot of people were prosecuted, politically prosecuted and tortured. And back then, this is first time when we, and by we I mean me as a lawyer and a group of representatives of the opposition led by Mukhtar Ablazov, we were compiling our own list that we call this Zhanaozen list, similar to the Magnitsky list. That was an example for us. And we collected all necessary testimonies and evidences to prove that those people that we put on the list, they actually deserve personal sanctions. And we haven't moved much since then, but at least right now in the latest resolution of the European Parliament that came out this February, it's already European Parliament said that EU should consider personal sanctions on the human rights, with respect to human rights violation from Kazakhstan. And unfortunately, in Kazakhstan, the situation with human rights getting worse and worse. And so for me, it's very painful to listen to the conversation of that, you know, we should punish bigger countries and smaller countries kind of will get the message. Because for us, when we have to listen to the lies of our regime for 30 years, and we now see these horrible consequences of these lies that the country that has basically becomes in a kleptocracy with a very strong authoritarian regime. So for us, delays in personal sanctions, they mean delay in future development. And going back to my story, so how the Kazakhstan's regime prosecuted me. Kazakhstan tried to arrest me using Interpol, and Interpol very much like UN institutions, or I like to compare it with FIFA. You know, when so, every country has a vote, and in the end of the day, it's basically can be hijacked by the non-democratic states. And we actually worked a lot together with Open Dialogue Foundation on reforming the Interpol, so they will be more aware of the politically motivated cases. So Kazakhstan tried to extradite me twice from Belgium, and where I have political asylum since 2013. In 2014, I received a credible threat that Kazakhstan hired someone, and I was told that to kidnap you or turn you into a vegetable. So I very much relate to the stories that's happening to the Turkish activists all over the world right now. And basically, Belgian Federal Police unfoiled a real plot against me on Belgian soil. I'm also recognized as a victim in another criminal case of illegal surveillance on the Belgian territory. And Kazakhstan also abused international legal cooperation, sent a lot of requests for mutual legal assistance to Belgium against me. They made criminal complaints against me. And everything, it's always the goal, it's always the same, to stop me from working and to get all my devices, to seize all my computers, so they can get access to the information that, you know, like all our network of activists that I work with in Kazakhstan. And kind of everything culminated for me personally in 2017 when my brother, who lives in Kazakhstan, was arrested there, basically taken hostage. And when he was arrested, he was bluntly told that you make your sister come back to Kazakhstan and, you know, we will release you. My brother refused to cooperate. refused to do so, and he was severely tortured and then sentenced for 7 years. And he was recognized as a political prisoner, and after 2-year long ordeal, a lot of international pressure, interference of the European Parliament, I will be forever grateful for that. He actually was saved and released and managed to leave the country. So when the legal means don't work, illegal means don't work. So Kazakhstan uses a very aggressive smear campaign. It's just an example, right? As for the last 2 years, there have been over 150 publications in 5 languages trying to destroy my reputation. 150, and I'm not even a public person, you know. So it's quite amazing what the regime does in order to destroy somebody who they consider effective or dangerous for the regime. And obviously, I am dangerous for the regime because personal sanctions are extremely dangerous for the regime. So I'm just a conduit. They're not afraid of me, they're afraid of personal sanctions. And this is just an example how my case demonstrates that. And this is absolutely great that the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament just adopted a resolution urging to extend the scope of the EU global human rights sanction regime to include corruption cases. And we've been working with Antonio on that in Italy, you know, like with Ludmila and Bundestag, all over the place, right? Trying to convince kind of decision makers that it's absolutely necessary. And for me, as a person from Kazakhstan, this is probably one of the key components because all the money that's stolen from you know, our nation and one of the richest nations, they are basically right now you know, hiding somewhere in bank accounts and in real estate around Europe. And but what would be important, very important to add one thing to the resolution. It's and it would make a huge difference for the civil society. It's establishing a mechanism of protection for those who provide information, either publicly or privately, to the Western institution about human rights violation and about corruption schemes. And this protection is very much needed. And I hope that the Parliament will take it into consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bota. And now immediately I would like to give the floor to Barlik Mendegiziv, interpreter and one of organizers of this event. He's the founder of the US-based Freedom Kazakhstan Foundation, which is a human rights organization. And unfortunately, he became a victim again of this kind of, he got basically threats from the chief of the National Security Committee demanding that he has to stop his promoting human rights and personal sanctions towards to those who violate human rights in Kazakhstan. So Barlik, can you please tell us what's happened with you, how you got these threats, from whom, and what's happened with your family and associates in Kazakhstan in this regard? But can you help me to translate also to Barlik's speech?
Absolutely.
Спасибо большое за организацию этого важного мероприятия. Мой случай, так же, как и Бота Жирдамали и ее брата Искандера Римбетова, режим диктатора Назарбаева взял в заложники также мою семью, проживающую в Казахстане, и также сотрудников компании CEST, которую я основал в 1997 году.
Thank you so much for organizing this important event. And in my case, just as the case of Bota Jardimali and her brother Iskander Irimbetov, the regime of dictator Nazarbayev has taken my family that lives in Kazakhstan and employees of the company that I founded, Karachaganak Support Services, hostage.
Как Людмила сказала, я проживаю в Соединенных Штатах, я активно добиваюсь персональных санкций в отношении высокопоставленных чиновников и нарушителей прав человека в Казахстане.
As Ludmila said already, I live in the US where I kind of actively pursue personal sanctions against high-profile officials, high-profile human rights violators in Kazakhstan.
Сейчас в Казахстане, к сожалению, арестован мой старший брат Бекижан. Его арестовали 3 июня 2021 года.
Unfortunately, right now in Kazakhstan, my oldest brother Bekijan is arrested, and he was arrested on June 3rd of this year.
В декабре 2020 года через посредника глава КНБ Карим Масимов передал мне угрозу. Мне сказали, что если я не прекращу свою гражданскую активность, то меня, моих братьев, моих близких, проживающих в Казахстане, будут уголовно преследовать. Также мне угрожали, что Казахстан объявит меня в международный розыск и будут пытаться экстрадировать из США.
Okay. In December 2020, through an intermediary middleman, I received a message from the head of National Security Committee, KNB, former KGB, right? Karim Masimov. He passed a threat to me, and I was told if I don't stop my civic activities, then me, my brother, and my relatives who lived in Kazakhstan would be persecuted. I also received a threat that Kazakhstan would put me on an international wanted list, so basically on the Interpol list, and will request my extradition from the US.
Таким образом, Масимов добивается, чтобы я перестал оказывать финансовую помощь гражданским активистам, продвигать персональные санкции в Соединенных Штатах к нарушителям прав человека в Казахстане.
So by making such threats, Masimov wanted me to stop from providing financial assistance to the civil society activists in Kazakhstan and to promote personal sanctions in the US against those who violate human rights in Kazakhstan.
Этим посредником был Бергей Раскалиев, бывший аким Атыраускай области, который сейчас проживает в данный момент в Лондоне и лично сотрудничает с Каримом Масимовым. Кстати, в свое время Бергей Раскалиев заставил Назарбаева через компромат вернуть часть своих активов, ранее конфискованных властями Казахстана.
Okay. So this person who conveyed the message was Bergey Raskaliyev, is a former governor of the Atyrau region in Kazakhstan. He now lives in London and personally cooperates with Karim Masimov, head of KNB. And this person, Bergey Raskaliyev, he was actually in the past he blackmailed Nazarbayev and forced him to return some of his assets that previously had been confiscated by Kazakh authorities.
Я отказал шантажу Карима Масимова и продолжаю борьбу с политическими убийцами Казахстана. В результате в конце декабря 2020 года вооруженные люди Масимова пришли к моим братьям домой. Они сказали, что якобы ищут 10 украденных лошадей, 300 метров электрического кабеля. Абсурд в том, что лошадей и кабели искали в доме, в шкафах у моих братьев Калака и Эрика. Естественно, ожидаемо их не нашли.
Yeah, so I rejected that blackmail and continued to fight for the future of Kazakhstan. As a result, in late December of last year, 2020, those agents of KNB, they came to my brother's house and they said that they came with a search, and they were saying that they're looking for allegedly stolen 10 horses and 300 meters of cable, right? Of cable. And the absurdities of the situation was that they were looking for the horses and cables in the closets of the houses, of the house, and in the wardrobe, etc. And obviously they didn't find anything. It's intimidation technique. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Мой брат Калык почти ослеп, передвигается в инвалидной коляске с помощью ее супруги. Вооруженный налет на его дом был сделан, чтобы напугать семью и подорвать и так очень слабое здоровье моего брата. Агенты Масимова приходили даже в больницу сразу после ампутации второй ноги у Калака 14-15 июня 2021 года. Агенты КНБ таким образом оказывают давление на моих братьев, чтобы я прекратил свою деятельность.
No. My brother Kalak, he's disabled, right? He's almost blind. He's he's on a wheelchair. He can move around only with help of his wife. And when that armed raid happened on his house, he's after that even like his physical health extremely deteriorated, and he got into ended up in the hospital. But the agents came even to the hospital immediately after he was operated in the beginning of the June, and the agents were putting pressure on my brother to kind of force me to stop my activities.
В мае 2021 года трое представителей компании CEST были осуждены условно на 3 и 5 лет. Kazakhstan Service – это компания, которую создал я. Сотрудники Комитета национальной безопасности вымогали пытками и отказом от медицинской помощи у них дать ложные показания против меня, но они отказались.
There is a company, Karachaganak Support Services company, that I set up. In May 2021, the employees of Karachaganak Support Services received suspended sentences from 3 to 5 years. And basically, this is because the KNB officers were trying to get from them false testimonies against me, and they also applied to them torture and denied them medical treatment.
Сейчас в данный момент счета компании заблокированы, около 200 сотрудников компании CEST выходят на протесты, челленджи с требованием остановить политические репрессии.
Yeah, and so now the company's accounts are frozen by the state, and like 200 people that work for that company, they just come and have to protest to stop political repression.
Как я уже сказал, 3 июня 2021 года был арестован мой старший брат Бекижан Индегазиев, который так же, как я, занимался бизнесом. Бекижан тоже совсем недавно вышел из больницы, и его здоровье находится под серьезной угрозой, пока он находится в СИЗО.
So, as I mentioned earlier, just at the beginning of the month, my brother Bekijan, he was arrested, and he was a businessman just as me for many years. And just before his arrest, he was released from a hospital, and right now in the pretrial detention, his health is deteriorating. And my brother helped me in paying fines for activists in politically motivated cases. And he also was giving money to human rights defenders to pay for the lawyers in politically motivated cases.
Сначала Бекижана обвинили в употреблении наркотиков, которые ему подбросили во время обысков полицейские, но дело не клеилось совсем, поэтому придумали новые сфабрикованные обвинения. Теперь его ложно обвиняют в создании организованной преступной группировки, отмывание денег и уклонение от налогов.
Yeah, initially he was accused in being a drug addict, usage of drugs. So the police basically planted some drugs in his house, but that case was absolutely ridiculous and immediately fell apart. So they came up with bigger charges, and they accused him, they fabricated case and accused him in organizing a criminal group and doing money laundering for me and tax evasion.
Я и Бекижан занимаемся бизнесом много лет, и регулярно платили налоги, но когда мы стали поддерживать гражданское общество, сразу начались преследования. По аналогичным обвинениям преследуют и моего племянника Армана Медегазиева.
Yeah. So both Bekijan and I, we've been doing business for many years and pay taxes regularly. But the moment we started supporting civil society, they started prosecuting us. And my nephew, Arman, he's being prosecuted in similar charges right now as well.
Как видите, глава КНБ самого политически репрессивного государственного органа полностью реализует свою угрозу, так называемые контрсанкции. Я ожидаю, что следующим ихним шагом будет попытка экстрадировать меня из США при помощи лоббистов Казахстана, заблокировать мои банковские счета, чтобы я не мог поддерживать борьбу против режима.
Yeah, so you can see kind of in real time how the threats of the head of KNB are being realized, and this is for me, these are contra sanctions, and what I expect that what they would do next is just try to extradite me from the US, and they will use lobbyists for that and try to block my accounts here, so I cannot continue my fight.
Но несмотря на эти преследования, я уверен, что мы добьемся цели и остановим нарушителей прав человека в Казахстане. Для этого важно двигаться с единым фронтом и гражданскому обществу, и политикам ЕС, и США. Тогда все вместе легче держать контрудары диктаторов. Я очень рассчитываю на рекомендации, что рекомендации докладчиков этого митинга будут услышаны в Европе и в США.
But despite all of this harassment, I'm quite confident that we really can achieve our goals and we will stop the human rights violators in Kazakhstan. And for that purposes, it's very important to have, for the civil society in Kazakhstan, to have support of the politicians, both in the EU and US. And by doing so, we can only by doing so we can stop those dictators. And I very much hope that the recommendations of the speakers of this event, they will be taken into consideration by the European Parliament. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Barlik. We unfortunately absolutely out of the time with this discussion, but nevertheless we are going to collect all our messages and send it to all viewers. And we have a number of questions. For example, what to do with President Nazarbayev and his regime in Kazakhstan, especially with his Chinese relation, for example, because they support China's policy, repressive policy. They use the same methods. They persecute people who try to flee from a concentration camp from China and try to find a safe place in Kazakhstan. But even their relatives who try to protest in order to defend their relatives in concentration camp are persecuted in Kazakhstan. So why basically Kazakhstan is not assumed or not sanctioned based on all of this activity? I see there is some problems with connection, and Bota unfortunately completely disappeared. Okay, she is rejoining us. Sorry, today is totally terrible connection in Brussels, and we are all constantly disappearing from time to time, but luckily Bota rejoined us. But I don't know, you haven't heard the question, right? Regarding what I just said about Kazakhstan, no? So once again, the repressive policy of Nazarbayev regime, we just try to collect all questions because we have a lot of viewers from Kazakhstan. Repressive policy of Nazarbayev regime, which basically supports Chinese repressive policy, especially towards victims of concentration camp in China, and those who protest under Chinese embassy or consulate in Almaty, in Astana, to defend these victims of political persecution in China. Kazakhstan basically uses the same methods. Why and what we can do in order to sanction Nazarbayev based on this situation? Maybe also Dolkun, because you promote also a lot of sanctions. Maybe Aaron. So please, floor is yours. Try to answer.
I will answer quickly. That from my position, where what we can do, I hope that we are doing our part, guys, right? And if this question comes from Kazakhstan, I can only say one thing, that it's really up to you whether you support human rights defenders, whether you support activists, and you can support in various ways. You can write on social media, use Twitter. We always repeat, please use Twitter, because that's especially in the times of COVID, it's sometimes the only way to achieve to reach decision makers, right? Then come and protest, show to the regime what you think about the repressive tactics and how Kazakhstan cooperates with China, with Chinese regime, and that is actually can be quite effective, because for the last 2 years we actually saved quite a number of refugees from China, only because people came and protested, because they came to the trials of those people and basically didn't allow those people to be deported to China. So this cooperation is always necessary, and again, if you need personal sanctions, you have to be vocal about it, and you have to. We are doing our part, but you have to convince, basically diplomats on the ground that this is what the society needs, and this is basically we reach the point when the regime is doing like window dressing for such a long time, and we are and the situation is just deteriorating every month, that Europe and the US should stop believing empty promises of this regime again and again and again.
Thank you. Dolkun, Aaron, do you want something to comment on this regard?
Yeah, very short comment. Thank you. Question, yes, and today is the Kazakhstan, not only all the Kazakhstan, even the Kyrgyzstan, all Central Asia leaders and country policy, and it was Uyghur disasters, and they are all silenced because we are sharing same language, same culture, same history with the Kazakh, Kyrgyz, Uzbek, and the Uyghurs people. But no, the ongoing genocide is happening. But this country all the time is behind of China. China is strong because this whole country is very dependent economically to China. So far, we know up to 50 Uyghur refugees deported to China, only from Kazakhstan. 2015, 11 Uyghurs escaped from the mountain that's around to the Kyrgyzstan, and Kyrgyzstan government just killed all 11 Uyghurs refugees. This is just refugees, because of the Chinese persecution, escape from China to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. Even Uzbekistan government deported Canadian citizen, Uyghur origin, but Canadian citizen, Hussein Jalil, 2004-5, deported to China. This is the situation in Pakistan as well. Pakistan also, because of all the time supports China, because Pakistan from time to time the leader of the Islamophobia and speaking of against the Western country and the dependent Islam, so-called. But unfortunately, just two days ago, one of the media reporter interviewed with him. He's saying, "I don't care." Very openly say, and he criticized all India, he criticized all the country, the democratic country. And there's a reporter asking, what's going on? Because it's the Uyghur Muslim, more than 1 million Uyghur Muslim in the concentration camp today. He just a disaster for this old policy. So that's why, and the EU must be very closely and involved this space in the European Union must be made clear its position. It's very, very important. And the more dialogue more close work with the civil society, should be listening more civil society, because this country, Central Asia country, some other China, there is no space for civil society. Before 1996, and established Shanghai Cooperation Organization, that time, we were political activism, little bit had a space, but since 1996, established Shanghai Cooperation Organization, no space, not at all.
Yeah. Thank you. And Dr. Rhodes, what comments you would like to give, if you have?
Well, I would just like to observe that people in the human rights community invest a huge amount of energy in trying to change the policies of Western countries with regard to their own country. And they invest a huge amount of energy in trying to get, international institutions to pass resolutions and so on. These things don't have much effect they haven't. And if you look at Central Asia, I mean, I started working in Central Asian countries in about 1995. And very little has changed since those years. In fact, some of the countries have the same people in charge exactly. It's the communist elite. And I just would like to caution, from my perspective, people of having too much expectations about the impact of policies like sanctions. And I think Western countries have to approach these countries with a little more modesty also, because you find in Brussels, Washington, these places, people think they're in the kind of the control panel of the world, but that's not the fact. And the change is going to come from those countries when the people make a regime change. That's the fact, and maybe that's a dirty word in a conversation.
No, it's not. It's not.
But for me, this is what it's all about. I mean, this is what it's all about, and I don't mean anything about violence. I mean things like a general strike or a democratic revolution. That's what's in store. If you want to have a society that really respects human rights, it has to be founded on the beliefs of the people and reflect their demands for freedom. And I think very often, I wish I wish some of the people working in human rights would get involved in opposition political parties that have human rights as their central ideology, their central principle. And I think that's really the only way that we're ever going to see any really solid change that doesn't reflect just the replacement of one corrupt group by another corrupt group. I don't mean to be a downer, but that's
no, but you said actually something very exactly to the point. Boda, you want to reflect because you are extremely active on this regard, both in activism and promotion sanctions.
Yes, I very much understand where Dr. Rhodes coming from in terms of this pessimism, I would say. Both with respect to the Western institutions and in a way with the changes that has been happening in our part of the world. But I understand that. At the same time, I say that you always have to look at the dynamics that's happening in the region. But in that regard, I will talk about Kazakhstan specifically. You have to look at this with a kind of a historic point right now, when the dictator is aging, when he is looking for the successor. He's extremely vulnerable right now. There is big fights within his own clan, between his own children. Everyone is trying to tear apart the country, etc. And this is that moment when the democratic choices, the people that educated, people that have ideas, people that have a program. We are not just human rights defenders. We're activists. You have to, in a country like Kazakhstan, you have to do everything. right? You have to be a Renaissance man. You have to write political programs and at the same time implement them and defend people and do fundraising and do political advocacy and everything, right? Because if you don't do it, there is nobody except for you, right? And so the civil society in Kazakhstan is very much growing and becoming more and more active, because it's kind of sees that moment. We either going to be stuck with another success of Nazarbayev, like with Dariga Nazarbayev or somebody else, right? And the regime will be frozen in time, but that's like it's happening in other neighboring countries, right? Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, or Azerbaijan, right? Or we actually will do some change. And we do need help with personal sanctions, because we know how much the Kazakh, I don't want to use word elite, but the Nazarbayev and his cronies, how much they depend on the West, how much they store, and how much they're vulnerable if the sanctions will come from the West. It really will undermine their power structure from within, and they put a kind of a fear in the hearts of a lot of corrupt officials that are around. It's the time maybe for them to, what we say, change shoes, like change gears and switch sides, right? If they're thinking about the future, not only for themselves, but for their children as well. And so I'm a little bit more optimistic, and I would say that we are not putting like kind of a fake modesty, calling it something else, democratic changes. We specifically say we are going for the regime change, nothing else, because we are sick and tired of the existing regime in Kazakhstan, and we want to have a normal government with normal separation of powers, with a strong judiciary, etc., etc. And in Kazakhstan, of course, regime change isn't extremism, and even like we just had a person charged with extremism just for holding an empty piece of paper, right? Yeah, and this is already extremism. So we have to jump further and say that, yeah, we are going for the kill, we are going for the regime change, absolutely.
So I propose to stop here. I'm really grateful for everyone who delivered the speeches, recommendation, their own experience. And of course, it's a very difficult discussion, but it's important discussion. In all conclusions, we also call for civil society activists, human defenders, expert whistleblowers who observe this video to participate in creation recommendation for members of European Parliament, European Commission, in order to, as much as possible, provide them tools to make strong resolution, which is going to be voted on 6th of July, quite soon in European Parliament, about making broader EU sanctions global regime and to give more place for civil society, members of European Parliament, whistleblowers, to play in it. Thank you so much for everyone. Thank you very much, Antonio, Barlik, and everyone, Dolkun, Dr. Rodos, and Nugur, and of course, both for you and Mr. Butikofer for participation in this event. Thank you and good luck.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you for watching, if you're watching.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you very much. All the best.